Good morning. Thank you for joining us today and welcome to the fourth Coffee with the Candidate with U.S. Representative Candidate Democratic nominee Natalie Klein. We appreciate having you here today. If you have any questions for Ms. Klein, the partnership welcomes you to use the chat box to submit any questions to our moderators. I'm Eldon Callan, Vice President of Governmental Affairs and General Counsel. The partnership is a public-private alliance for the betterment of the economic, business, and community development in Monongalia County and the greater Morgantown area. It is comprised of the Chamber of Commerce, the Monongalia County Development Authority, Morgantown Area Economic Partnership, and the Neighborhood Revitalization Cooperation, otherwise known as Sunny Side Up. Partnership takes a holistic approach to business, economic, and community development and focuses on creating strategic solutions for our growing community. As an organization combined of both public and private entities, we do not endorse candidates. However, we do focus strongly on many policies and issues that are important to our members. We have approximately 500 business members in the community, and we focus on those issues at the state, local, and federal levels that make a difference not only to our members, but the entire region. We are happy to have with us today U.S. Congressional District 1 Democratic nominee Natalie Klein. Ms. Klein will be able to tell us more about herself in a second, but I want to note that as a West Virginia native born in Parkersburg and raised in the Williamsburg area, she lived in the D.C. area as I did for 10 years, but the call of the mountains in West Virginia is always there. As a grandfather that loves Ice Cream Friday with my grandsons, I really appreciate why she and her husband Jason wanted to bring their son Teddy to have time with with his grandparents. So I appreciate why the partnership and the state talks about the need to bring people just like her and her husband, Jason, back to our state to build our workforce. I want to also introduce our moderators today. For both chairs of our Governmental Affairs Committee, Elizabeth Durr is a regional external affairs consultant with First Energy, Mon Power, for whom she has worked 26 years. She is a liaison between the electric utility and towns in 9 northern counties, including the state legislature, county governments, and nonprofit organizations. And we also have Dan Miller. He is a senior scientist with Potesta and Associates, a leading environmental engineering firm with locations in Charleston and Morgantown, West Virginia, and Winchester, Virginia. Thank you both for your efforts, dedication, and time to the partnership and to the entire community. I will now turn it over to you both.
Thank you for joining us, Natalie.
Thanks for having me.
We would just like for you to take about 5 minutes to explain a little bit about your background and why you decided to run for office representing West Virginia.
Okay. So thank you all. Thanks for having me today. I really appreciate it. It's great to get to speak with you all this morning and get a better understanding of what you all see as the priorities for the Morgantown area. I am Natalie Klein, running for U.S. Congress to represent West Virginia's 1st Congressional District. And as Eldon so wonderfully said a minute ago, my husband and I, we were both from this district, but we were in DC for about 5 years. And when our son was 2, we decided to move back. We wanted him to know his family. In fact, we purchased my husband's grandmother's house, which is 2 doors away from my husband's parents. So every day my in-laws pick up my son from school, and then I walk down the street at about 5 o'clock and get him. And it's, it's so much of what we were looking for, where I can open the front door and just watch him, run through the neighbor's yard to his grandparents' house to really get to know them. And he, gets to know his aunts and uncles as well. And we wanted him to know what a close-knit community feels like. You know, we both grew up in West Virginia in the 80s. And if you were in West Virginia in the 80s, you know, it was, you know, riding your bicycle as a kid, you know, all over town, and your parents didn't necessarily need to know where you are at all times. You were just able to do that. And you were able to experience outdoor life here. And, you know, I feel like my blood is in the soil quite literally from, you know, as many times as these hills have tried to kill me. I'm not the most coordinated person on earth, so I shouldn't have always been playing in the hills or in the creeks with my friends, but that's the kind of lifestyle you get to grow up with here. You know, my husband loves more than anything to try to take my son down to the creek and catch crawdads and teach him to fish. My son's not really into it yet, but my husband's insistent that he's going to love it. But these are the reasons that we moved back. And right after we moved back, I just kept being bothered by this feeling of culture shock. Sorry if you hear those pings. I don't know how to mute them. But we kept feeling this culture shock, and it really bothered me. And I know I say this all the time, and if you've heard me talk, but I could not get over the fact that the place that made me who I am could cause me to feel culture shock, and especially a place so small like West Virginia. And it was really that, you know, within 5 years, even more of our communities have been devastated by the opioid epidemic. And it's not just the people who have succumbed to addiction. It affects our families. We have over 7,000 kids in foster care. I'm sorry about those dings. We have over 7,000 kids in foster care, and 11% of our kids are living in what we call grand families. And we have literally coined this as a term now. And I kept looking at my son's cohort. And at the time when we moved back, he was 2. He's 5 now. And I kept looking at his cohort, and a lot of my friends are teachers or social workers or physicians. And the stories that they would tell me are heartbreaking. Absolutely heartbreaking. And then when you talk to even more of our teachers and you realize how much our teachers are the first line of defense for these kids, they're the ones who are noticing if there's a problem at home. They're the ones who know what is going on in their home lives. And they're the ones who are making sure that a lot of our kids have nutritious meals, even when they're on strike or COVID hits and the schools are closed. They're still finding ways to make sure our kids can get food. But what our teachers will tell you every single time is they can't take our kids to the doctor. And the more you look at it and you realize that when I was in school in West Virginia, there was a full-time school nurse in my building all day. And that's not the case anymore. Funding has been cut so much that we have school nurses who are split between 2 and 3 different schools. So here we are living in a health crisis in West Virginia with our children becoming the biggest victims of this crisis. And there isn't even a nurse multiple days out of the week for them to go to, let alone we're not even addressing the mental health issues that, you know, happen when you're living in these situations. And it just bothered me that, you know, we chose to bring our son back here to be raised in that West Virginia that we were raised in and love and cherish. But yet our children, so many of them are being robbed of their childhoods that they're worried about eviction. They are worried about their next meal. They don't even know what it's like to see a doctor regularly. And so many of them can't even, you know, get clean clothes. So it's time that we have people who are average West Virginians who know what it's like to be an average West Virginian, who know what it's like to have medical debt, who know what it's like to have student loan debt, put forth fresh ideas with a new vision to come in and say, okay, you know what? This is what our kids need right now. This is what our neighborhood needs right now. And here's some ideas on how we can make sure that this next generation is able to be happy, healthy, and thrive. And wouldn't it be great if they had the ability to choose to stay in West Virginia when they graduate from high school? So, sorry, I will ramble forever, by the way, but that's pretty much what made me decide to run.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing all of that with us. Just a friendly reminder that each answer should be about 2 minutes long. And it was very interesting that you mentioned the health crisis, because one of the things that I wanted to ask about was something that we all first, or most of us, became aware of early in the year, and that is COVID-19. I think COVID-19 has changed the world. It has certainly changed how citizens of West Virginia go about their daily lives. And we've all seen a lot of changes because of COVID. Stores are closed and stores are open. Nursing homes are open for visitors, and as I have learned, they are closed for visitors. Schools and classrooms have classroom instruction. They have options for virtual instruction. And we all know that many jobs are now virtual. And as a matter of fact, many people have lost their jobs. And of course, the loss of loved ones. So while researchers are working around the clock to try to find a vaccine, we as citizens are doing our part and continuing to social distance and wear masks as we are advised. So my question is, with pre-COVID-19 normal appearing to be some ways off, how will you as a leader successfully manage or control our current social structure, meaning how we interact and live together? Or how do you see our lives changing over the next year due to COVID-19?
So pre-COVID, we had said, as a campaign, that we were already living in a public health crisis in West Virginia. This nation is now experiencing a public health crisis, but I feel like West Virginia has been living in one for a few years now. And one of the things that we wanted to do was implement what we're calling the Family Reinvestment Act, which would work like FEMA, except for medical crises. Again, this is a pre-COVID idea. It's still something we want to see through fruition. And what it would do is, identify regions in this country that have been hit by these medical crises, such as the opioid epidemic. And based on, population and whatnot, we would ensure that they would have the funding to open medical facilities instead of seeing them close, which is what we're seeing here. And also make sure that we have rehabilitation programs and mental health programs. But one of the biggest caveats of it is that it would also make sure that additional funding is there for our public schools to make sure that there are enough nurses in each building full-time every day, as well as establishing mental health programs and having enough counselors in our schools. So I feel like when you're living in a public health crisis like the opioid epidemic, the first thing you need to do is try to heal your community the best way that you can. So that is, one of our ideas for healing our community. But at the same time, we have to be able to function and be able to participate in our public education and also in our economy. And one of the answers to that is broadband access. I mean, everybody in West Virginia is talking about this now as we try to do these things and participate in virtual education and telecommute as much as possible. But here is the problem in West Virginia is we have not had a satisfactory broadband infrastructure yet. So in my opinion, the federal government should be championing this just like they championed, electricity with the National Electrical Code years ago to make sure that, we can invest in like cooperative companies, make sure that there is no company that can have a monopoly on those last mile connections to our houses. But one of the other things is the federal government needs to be championing is making sure that it's also affordable. So I know right now, we recently, when our little contract trial thing with Comcast came up, and all of a sudden our bill skyrockets and almost doubles, we got rid of all the fun stuff and are back down to, basic internet and basic television, but it's still a ridiculously high bill. So we already know that so many of our West Virginians are suffering, and we want to make sure that the federal government is instituting grant programs and ways for families who have public school children to be able to offset that financial cost so that the kids can participate in virtual school. And I also feel like investing in our broadband infrastructure just makes sense economically. I work from home. I telecommute for a software company in DC, a job that I had before we moved back. And West Virginia is very attractive to people in my type of a situation where I don't necessarily need to be in an office every single day. We have a low cost of living. We have a beautiful, beautiful state with lots of outdoor activities and recreational activities for people to enjoy. And one of the great benefits is, you can buy a beautiful house for a reasonable price and have a yard. You can have a big yard and you can raise a family here, and be able to financially afford it as long as you have a reasonable salary coming in. So I feel like West Virginia, if we can get our broadband act together and provide this resource and this, utility for people, then we can work on plans to help bring other people into the state and also keep people from leaving in the first place.
Thank you. And thank you for sharing us your ideas with respect to the Family Medical Act. You mentioned opioid addiction, and we all know that West Virginia is losing too many of our youth due to drug abuse, and really one is too many. And we have certainly lost many more than one. Work has been ongoing to reverse this epidemic, and a lot of money has been invested as well. A lot of people in our state know someone who is addicted. They know someone who has died or is suffering due to the effects of drug abuse. This includes the parents and siblings who suffer through this with their loved one who's addicted. And more and more families, I don't know if you have noticed this, but more and more families are opening up about the devastating effects that drugs have caused in their family and had on their children. And they do this because it's an effort. It's what they feel they can do to help others who are going through the same thing. Mm-hmm. And the question that I have is at the root of this, and that is about the drug traffickers. Can you tell us what you would do with respect to legislation regarding enforcing or creating laws that are related to the drug traffickers, specifically to ensure penalties that will reflect the severity of the traffickers' actions? Can you just tell us a little bit about what you would do with respect to that?
Yeah, I kind of have I have two different thought processes around this, because I don't feel that it's just one demographic that is responsible for the opioid epidemic in our state. So I'll try to quickly address both of those. Where I work right now, the software company that I work for, I have a little bit of experience working with agencies who are trying to combat various forms of trafficking, drug trafficking, human trafficking, and sex trafficking. And while I'm not in law enforcement, I can't speak about that, but just some of the experiences that I've had with my interactions with these agencies, we do need to have stricter penalties for drug traffickers, as well as other forms of trafficking. It is very easy today. It is very easy to have a trafficking operation, and it's way too easy. So I think that we need to be investing in technology that can help combat this. And I think that we do need to have stricter penalties for it. The effects of the opioid crisis, we see those effects, as you mentioned. It affects not just the person who has succumbed to addiction, it also affects their families, their parents, their children, and our communities as a whole. So we do need to have stricter penalties for that, as well as other forms of trafficking. And the mental health effects of it are detrimental to our communities. I also feel that we need to be looking at corporate corruption. It's unquestionable that pharmaceutical industries knew exactly what was happening here and in other regions where this has become a crisis. Just yesterday, they were in court settling this case. So we need to make sure that companies are not able to target our communities, and we need to do that in a way where they cannot incentivize physicians to prescribe more pills. We need to make sure that they cannot lobby against alternatives to pain management, to continue to prop themselves up and make theirs the only answer for pain management. I feel like this is a much bigger issue than what we probably have time for, and how long you want me to ramble about this right now. But I truly believe that corporate corruption is the biggest part of this, and we need to hold them accountable. And that is done through so many different pieces of legislation, from, more legislation regarding lobbying, more legislation regarding corporate transparency, additional legislation on campaign finance reform. So many different things can go into play to help alleviate this from a corporate corruption perspective. But I don't feel like the laws have caught up to either side from trafficking or corporate corruption. And it's time that we start figuring out better ways to penalize it and make it not so easy to target.
Thank you. Yeah, we really appreciate that. And it's interesting. It's like an onion. There's just so many layers.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll turn this over to Dan now. Thank you.
Thanks, Natalie. If you're a coffee drinker, I'd like to thank you for joining us for Coffee with the Candidate today.
I am. Thank you. I don't have any yet. I've already had 2 cups.
Okay. I'm on my second cup, which is unusual, but I would your comments on a couple of the questions that Libby had asked you answered at least one of my questions, and that was dealing with the broadband and how it accentuates the difference between the haves and the have-nots in the educational component here. So I thought you did a good job of addressing that. Maybe just to delve a little bit deeper, you mentioned how the corporate corruption and possibly how that relates to the FDA's complicit actions with the pharmaceutical industry. If you are successful in this election and you get to Washington, D.C., what committees would you ask to be put on so that you could have the impact that you're referring to help West Virginians in some of the problems that we're struggling with?
Honestly, I haven't decided yet. There are many, and I know it's it's not feasible to be on as many as I would love to be on and to tackle. I don't have a good answer for you yet because I just haven't decided. As a campaign, we originally decided that, you can't go and interview for a job and not be prepared to work on day one. So from day one, when the campaign was launched, we started coming up with policy proposal ideas. And this is part of the reason I don't know exactly what committees I would ask to be a part of and serve on, because I feel like our policy proposals are very broad and cover a lot of different areas. And I think that in itself also poses a lot of questions for the people of West Virginia. So we have the fact that, our little campaign is coming up with policy proposals related to healthcare, accessibility and affordability of healthcare, that we're trying to tackle broadband, that we are trying to tackle our jobs market, that we're trying to tackle how to reinvest in the next generation and keep them here. And that we're also trying to tackle finance in a sense of how we essentially want to go in and propose legislation to add another definition to a small business, like a Main Street America type business, so that the next time our government needs to issue stimulus packages to take care of our communities, that businesses that define our neighborhoods and our communities that employ like 25 people or less can actually get some of those ultra low rate loans instead of all of them being eaten up by multi-million-dollar corporations. So that's kind of the predicament I'm in, is I feel like so much needs to be done, and I'm not sure what committees I would ask to serve on yet.
Well, we've done this candidate coffee with the candidates with others, and the incumbent had indicated that when he was first brought into Washington as a representative of West Virginia, he asked to be on certain committees and was told, no, you're a freshman here, you don't have any experience, we don't put inexperienced peoples on committees. And he said, hey, I'm here to do what's best for West Virginia. You're going to have to break that tradition And I would suggest that don't take no for an answer if you get to Washington, D.C.
Oh, no, that will not be an option. I will be on something, hopefully a couple of different committees. Otherwise, why are you there?
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
So no, I appreciate that. It is very good advice. I certainly won't take no for an answer. It's just going to be a question of how can I best be utilized with my experience and background, and how can it best impact everyday West Virginians. So. Right.
And so I think that's an important thing to give some thought to, because being present when decisions are made, you can have a lot more influence than if you're not present, if you're not at the table on some of these committees that will have an impact on some of West Virginians, and the many, many issues that we're facing here. So
absolutely.
Thank you for the answer. Second question I have has to do with sort of an overall issue that has been kicking the can down the road, and that is the federal deficit that we have is just ballooning beyond anyone's anticipation. And although we do have a lot of problems in West Virginia, oftentimes it takes money to solve them. The educational system, we have, the state funding and the federal funding can augment some of the money that comes to the state. But how would you deal with the federal deficit and how it's ballooning when we have all these needs that the country and the state of West Virginia has? How would we pay for that? And I think we recognize that just kicking the can down the road for the next generation is not an acceptable answer. So how would you deal with the federal deficit and spending money that basically is being borrowed?
Yeah. So I think in this country, what we have been seeing for the last 20, 30 years is this shrinking middle class, growing elite wealthy class. And that's directly affected from tax cuts for the rich. If they just pay their fair share, like they did in, middle of this last century in the 1950s, we don't have these kind of deficits. So I do feel that eliminating some of the tax cuts for the rich will help significantly to reduce the deficit. And it would also allow us to afford these social services that we so desperately need right now, especially in places like West Virginia that have been facing, a public health crisis for many years and have been experiencing population loss every single year. It would allow us to be able to reinvest both in our communities and our infrastructure. So I think that that's one way to look at it. And I think it's also important to realize that eliminating these tax cuts does nothing but make life better for us in West Virginia. Unless you're making $400,000 plus a year, it doesn't affect you except for be able to afford to pay for more social services that can benefit you and reinvest back in your communities. So I think that that's the first step. I think the first step is making sure that our government has the needs of the average citizen placed before the needs of 1 to 5% at the top of our population. I also think that there are some other options out there that can generate tax revenue, and they're worth exploring, such as, cannabis legalization. And I'm not even talking about the medicinal benefits of it. The fact that the commercial usage and the use, textile applications that are available would do a lot for our economy. And being able to tax that would be huge. You can make biodegradable plastics. It's one of the fastest growing crops. So, you can replenish it quicker than you can replenish timber. So I know there's a company in Kentucky that produces, an alternative to hardwood flooring, and they're doing very well. And these are industries that would do well in West Virginia. So it would help open up our economy and provide more jobs here as well. So I think there are a few different things that need to happen. And those are just a couple of my ideas.
Very good. Thank you for your answers. It's been very informative. That's the only two questions that I have.
Thank you.
Okay, I think that wraps up the questions. Every candidate, I think, always has one burning thing that they have in mind that they didn't get the chance to say. So I'll give you a minute or more to say that one burning thing or something that you didn't get a chance to say, Natalie.
Thank you. We touched on a lot of my policy platforms, and I think you can notice a theme, which is this next generation in West Virginia. We need to be working to keep them here. When the next generation is able to stay here, they are the ones who become the next entrepreneurs in our state. They're the ones who are going to keep our job markets more flexible. They're the ones who are going to be taking care of us as we age. And they're going to have, you know, the education and the energy to come up with new and creative industries and markets for us. So please check out my website if you get a chance. We also have another policy on there that we didn't touch on called the Gen Z initiative. And it's basically a way to bring additional coursework to high school students and recent high school graduates in a free virtual environment to supplement what they're already learning. And these are all STEM courses that would help them to get more experience in things like programming, cybersecurity, principles of vertical farming, agrovoltaics, and things like that, that would help them to be able to get entry-level positions upon graduation from high school instead of being forced, you know, tens of thousands of dollars into student loan debt, or could possibly turn into transferable credits at another institution. But the hope is that by supplementing their education with courses that they can take for free from the comfort of their home, assuming that we have broadband, then it gives them the opportunity to stay here and enjoy our low cost of living, stay close to their families, and hopefully be the next entrepreneurs in West Virginia. So thank you.
Well, we thank you very much, Natalie Klein, for U.S. Congress to have our national candidates to join us and answer our questions is quite a privilege. We work very hard to get our membership issues out, and we thank you for putting yourself out there and address the public and business community. We appreciate your willingness to serve. I would also like to thank our moderators, Dan and Libby, for their work and commitment to the partnership. Finally, I would like to recognize our board chair, Sarah Woodrum, to close our session.
Thanks, Eldon. I also want to thank Dan and Libby. You guys are have done an amazing job and are keeping us on time each time and have great questions. Natalie, I want to thank you for being here. I learned a lot about you today, which was great. I have a similar past. I grew up in West Virginia, left for higher education and my initial work opportunities, and came back in 2013 after being gone for 25 years in Chicago, and brought my 4-year-old and my 6-year-old with me. And literally, I get a thank you note from my mom every year for bringing my kids back. I mean, it's just interesting. It's been great for them to get to know my parents too. But it's almost funny. I mean, I get that same thank you note every single year. She bakes brownies. She brought brownies over last night for the kids. All the things they probably don't need, but it's priceless. So
The love.
Yeah. I also had a bit of a culture shock when I got back here after being in Chicago. Not that we want to model ourselves after Illinois by any means. And I think it's why I've gotten so involved in organizations such as MAP. I'm president-elect for Rotary. I'm on the board for United Way. I'm on the board for OLLI in terms of education for older adults. So I've been doing a lot at the local level, but I give you a lot of credit and kudos for doing something that's bigger and that could really, really help us as a state and not just sort of the Morgantown area. You touched on all the issues, broadband, opioids, money, the educational system. We need more social services. All of those things are just so important. So we as an organization wish you luck. And on behalf of MAP and the board, I just want to thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you so much for having me. And it's wonderful to hear that so many of you have chosen to come back too, and to know that I'm not alone in choosing to come back. And it gives me hope that more people are going to do the same. And I have not met a mother or, a parent or a grandparent yet that does not want their babies and grandbabies to stay close to home. So I think if we can all kind of have that mindset, then we will be successful in providing a better future for the next generation.
Well, thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Natalie. I want to also remind everybody that this meeting will be on Facebook and our website for the public to watch and learn about our candidates. This concludes our session with Natalie Klein. Thank you and have a great day.